again, garden friends. Today I have a quick tour of my raised bed garden. This is where I mainly grow my vegetables and cut flowers. I'm going to show you what I currently have growing, some recent additions, and some changes we're making this year. And I apologize now for squinting throughout this whole video. My eyes are super sensitive to sunlight. This is my raised bed garden. We currently have 15 raised beds. I also have one in-ground bed, a cold frame, and I also grow in several containers in this garden as well. We had several big projects in this garden last year. The biggest one was removing all the grass between the beds and adding rock. With this many raised beds, trimming between the beds was a nightmare. I also have soaker lines in my beds and I connect several beds with hoses. So every time the grass needed to be trimmed, I'd have to pull those up. So this has saved a lot of time. And honestly, I think aesthetically, it just looks so much better. I love the contrast with all of these green plants next to that rock. One downside though, so this is something to definitely consider, I have noticed that these rocks put off a lot of heat. So it is a lot hotter in this garden, which was great for early spring. The plants were really doing well, having that little bit of a temperature boost, but it is going to be hot, hot, hot here in the summer when I'm working in my garden. I think mulch would be a great option for some people. The reason I decided to go with rock is because in the spring we get some really heavy rains and the ground in this area tends to get flooded, and I was worried about that mulch washing away. Even with those rocks giving off a lot of heat in the summer, I felt like rock was a much better option for our garden. We also added 2 more water spigots to this garden. This gives me a total of 3. My goal this year is to have an automated watering system that covers this entire garden, so I needed to add those 2 more spigots. One of the big changes I'm making this year with that watering system is I'm slowly transitioning from using soaker hoses to watering grids. I've used soaker hoses to water my garden for the last several years, and I do still think they're a good option for a lot of people. They're fairly inexpensive. They're easy to lay down. What I don't like about them is that they crack really easily, and so I have to make repairs on them quite often. The spread on these is not very far. It only waters a few inches on either side of the hose, and I can't leave these out year round. The winter would just wreak havoc on these, so I have to pull them up every single year and then lay them back out in the spring, and that takes a lot of time. I do have a few beds that are kind of oddly shaped, so I'll need to leave soaker lines on these. I'm slowly switching over to these watering grids. These are from Garden in Minutes. They water from all 4 sides of that grid, so it covers the entire bed, and they're all weather, so I can leave them out all year long. You can buy the grids separate if you have existing raised bed. If you have corner posts like I do, just make sure you get the cornerless option. Or you can get the garden bundle, and this will come with a metal raised bed, the connection manifold, and that watering grid. With those connection manifolds, you can connect multiple watering grids if you have longer beds. You can also run hoses between the beds to connect several beds together. This makes watering a lot easier. So the main project this year is to switch over to those watering grids, and then I'll be using hose splitters and timers and connecting several beds together to make this completely automated. And once I get that all set up, I'll do another video. Now let me show you what I have growing. First, you'll notice I have row covers on a lot of beds. This is somewhat for insects like cabbage worms, but it's mostly for the birds and rabbits. They have been awful this year. I ended up losing a ton of spring seedlings to hungry animals. My setup is pretty easy. This is called PEX piping. You can also use PVC pipes. The PEX piping is just a little bit more flexible, but I cut it in different lengths just depending on how high I need these rows to be. And when the weather is warmer, I prefer using this more kind of mesh fabric. It gives a little bit more air circulation and can let some water in as opposed to the thicker blankets or quilts that you would use to protect them from frost. And then to hold them down, I either just use random rocks or bricks around the garden, or I use these large chip clips. If I need to protect individual plants like this broccoli here from hungry birds or rabbits, then I use tomato cages with a mesh laundry bag. I get these from the dollar store. And then I'll usually use landscaping pins to keep it in place at the bottom. So in this metal raised bed, under those nets, I have 2 Luna broccoli plants. I have some nasturtium. This is a great trap crop for leaf miners and aphids. Along the edges, I have a few green onions planted. I have some Easy Park MTO lettuce. All of this was started through winter sowing. This is a really delicious lettuce variety, but it will be coming out soon because the weather is heating up. Then I have some volunteer plants. I have 2 tomatoes. I'm assuming these are cherry tomatoes because this is what I grew in this bed last year. And then I have a cucumber growing as well. And in the back, these little guys are mouse melons, also known as cucamelons. And this is my first time growing these this year, and I'll just trail them up this fence. Here's more of that nasturtium and green onions. I love planting onions on the edges of my beds. Their strong smell will really help keep pests away. This interesting shaped bed is mostly for peppers this year. I do also have some nasturtium and some cosmos growing. I love using these to both trap insects and also to attract pollinators. I have 2 peppers that I overwintered, meaning these were grown last year. I dug them up, brought them inside, grew them over the winter, and then just replanted them. This Sugar Rush peach pepper is actually going into its 3rd season. So I had the Sugar Rush peach pepper, and this is a Mad Hatter pepper. I also have another Mad Hatter pepper because I absolutely love them. I have a cayenne pepper and 2 jalapenos. This is my potato bed. I usually grow early season variety, so I have 3 different ones in this bed. I have Prairie Blush, Purple Viking, and Dark Red Norland. Again, lining the bed with a few of those onions to help repel pests. I also have more of those beautiful little dwarf cosmos and nasturtium. In this small bed, I have parsnips growing. I had a little bit of spotty germination, but these tops get so big, they'll really fill out this bed. Parsnips are the longest growing plant in my garden. They get planted usually early April, end of March, and I don't harvest them until after first frost. Obviously, nasturtium is one of my favorite companion plants for a spring and fall garden. It does prefer that cool season. And not only is it a trap crop for many pests like aphids and leaf miners, but it gets these beautiful flowers, and the entire plant is edible. The flowers are a beautiful addition to salad, and the leaves have almost kind of a spicy, peppery taste. In this back bed, I have some beautiful English lavender growing. The bees are really enjoying this right now, and the smell is amazing. I mostly use this back bed for perennials or large flowering plants. I had some extra celosia that I tucked into the sides, but I had several volunteer tithonia, also called Mexican sunflower, and actually I've got 4 coming up, and 1 is plenty for this bed. These things get huge. This bed needs some major pruning, but this is where I grow most of my perennial herbs. So I have some German thyme here, oregano, and then I have some chives that just finished flowering. I'm going to be collecting seed from these. This is my dahlia bed. I usually plant at least 3 or 4 of these every year. I love using them for cut flowers. Again, companion planting with that nasturtium and green onions. I think somewhere in here I also seeded some marigolds. Yep, right there. I do have one that is a little bit stunted. I'm not sure why. This is a cafe au lait, so I'm going to have to watch it over the next few weeks. This bed has several varieties of cabbage. They really got hit hard with cabbage worms before I got it covered, but they are making a comeback. I also have, again, nasturtium, onions, and cosmos. I also have some poppies that are starting to bloom. This is my largest bed, and on this side I have some ranunculus growing. This is one of my favorite spring flowers to grow. They are absolutely beautiful, but they start to die back when the weather gets hot. So in a few weeks I'll cut back all the leaves and flowers, dig up the corms, and I'll store them to be planted next spring. Again, companion planting with some of those dwarf cosmos, and then I have cucumbers that will be growing up this trellis. These are Marketmore 76. I do have one zucchini that is flowering, which is why it's uncovered so the bees can get to it, but this is actually a climbing variety. I believe it's called Black Forest, but this one will be grown vertically up a tomato cage. I have some more zucchini growing. This is a variety called 8 Ball, and it actually grows round zucchini, so that's a fun new one I'm trying out this year. I have 4 chamomile starts in this bed. I love growing this for tea. It smells so good, and it's great for attracting pollinators. And in the middle here, I have 5 striped German potatoes. These are my favorite heirloom potatoes to grow. You can't see it just yet. I just planted the seeds, but I'm also growing a yellow doll watermelon in this bed, and it will just vine in between all of these plants. On our back cattle panel trellis, I have yard-long beans growing. These are one of my favorite beans. They are so delicious to eat fresh or cooked. On the other side of this bed, I have 5 different varieties of carrots growing in a bunch of different colors. I have white satin, ya-ya, moonraker, yellow stone, and deep purple. On the other side of our front trellis, I have dwarf gray sugar peas growing, and look how beautiful the blossoms are on these. In this next bed, I have some Scotch curled kale, Then I have more of those dwarf cosmos. I have some okra growing here. Then I have several different varieties of cauliflower, veronica, flamenco. Again, lining that bed with onions. And on the end, I have a few varieties of cabbage. In the front of this bed, I have several varieties of radishes growing, blue moon, white icicle, and watermelon. But I also have some volunteer zinnias growing up. I also have a volunteer potato. I must have missed one when harvesting last year. In the middle of this bed, I also have some French radishes and some turnips. I'm mainly growing garlic in this bed. I have two varieties of hardnut garlic, German Hardy and Georgian Fire. I've been pruning scapes off of these, so they should be ready to harvest in about 3 to 4 weeks. This is my main onion bed. This is where I grow most of my storage onions. I have 3 varieties. I have Tannet, Blush, and Candy onions. Again, companion planting with some dwarf cosmos on the corners. In this small container, I have rainbow candy crush kale. This can be grown as an ornamental kale. It's really beautiful and has a deep purple center, but it is edible. In fact, it's supposed to be a variety that is excellent for making kale chips. In my second metal raised bed, I have some lettuce that's definitely going to need to be harvested soon with this warm weather. I have milagro in the back and red fire in the front. I have 4 pak choi plants and more of those dwarf sugar peas growing up this fence. And finally, in this large in-ground bed, I have a lot of things growing. In the corners, again, those dwarf cosmos and nasturtium. But I also have some ground cherries planted. These actually were volunteers, and they make a great trap crop for flea beetles. Flea beetles will eat these before anything else in my garden, but the ground cherries don't mind it, and they make really delicious fruit. I have 2 Excelsior pickling cucumbers. This is actually a parthenocarpic variety of cucumbers, so it doesn't need to be pollinated to make fruit, so I can actually keep it covered. 2 Luna broccoli plants growing on the end. I'll probably need to add some shade cloth to these. On the edges of these beds, again, I've just companion planted with more of those ground cherries and lots of those onions. And throughout this bed, I have several varieties of basil and tomatoes planted, Italian leaf basil, Genovese basil, sweet basil, and then I mostly have San Marzano and orange jazz tomatoes planted. And on the other end of that bed, I have some early dew melon. This is a honeydew melon. I love growing those vining crops to act like a mulch to grow in between taller plants like tomatoes. And there you go. That's everything I have growing in my raised bed garden. Check back for an update on that new watering system and for a midsummer garden tour. And now I have a ton of work to get done, so I'll see you in the next one. Bye.